devastating because it damaged the environment significantly in and around Kandy. That was unfortunate, but what evolved from there was a very successful coffee industry, and eventually on the ashes of that industry, because that industry suffered a blight, which more or less in the years leading up to 1867, when young Scotsman James Taylor, he experimented with tea, again, taking plants from Peradeniya, where it had already been tried because they had been brought in from Assam, from the jungles of Assam. And there was the birth, 1867 was the birth of our great tea industry.
All right. So we have in the early 1800s the tea industry, and then we had the British who's done most of the planting back in the day, and then we have brands like yourselves that evolved. I believe with your dad's venturing into the industry, starting very small. Could you just tell us how Dilmah came into the journey of the tea industry, and when did it happen, and how did it all happen?
Maybe at this point I'll put something up and maybe share the screen. So, right, hopefully you should see something now.
Yes.
Great. So, okay, so this might give a little indication. I'd like to maybe show you the timeline. It was in 1930 that my father was born in a very humble village. What is relevant about his story is the fact that he was an ordinary Sri Lankan from an ordinary background. But
sorry, Dilmah, we see your Zoom screen. We still can't see the presentation. We see your Zoom screen.
My apologies. How does that look? Do you see it now?
Perfect.
Great. So, Lewie, my father's story is especially significant because he came from a very simple, he came from the village Palansena near Negombo. So really an unexceptional lower middle class Sri Lankan family. But of course, he possessed a few attributes which we'll talk about in a moment in context of your own students' aspirations. And you can see the timeline of the business. It was eventually in 1958, when he was 58, that would be 1988, that Dilmah was born. And why this gap? Well, simply because at that time, there were no Sri Lankans who were permitted into the tea industry. I mean, there was various things that they said. It was, we eat too much curry, too much spice, and therefore we can't taste the subtlety of different teas. But it was, of course, to preserve their visas, to preserve the role of the British at the time. And eventually it was in the 1950s that the first batch of Sri Lankans were allowed into Mincing Lane to taste and so on. And my father was amongst them. There were 6 of them, I think, at that time. They went, spent some time in Mincing Lane, learned the art of tasting. And from the time my father came back in 1950, he he was driven to build his own brand, because I think while he was in England, he saw the futility of what was happening to our tea industry. Our tea taken to England, it was mixed with tea from other origins, and still with the label Pure Ceylon tea, it was marketed. And so as a Sri Lankan, of course, then they were known as Ceylonese, he came back wanting to build a real pure Ceylon tea brand that was genuinely pure. And, the odds were stacked. So it took him nearly 40 years. And in 88, Dilmah was born.
Okay. So that's a rich heritage and a journey. And I see now you're part of the 2nd generation, and perhaps your kids are part of the 3rd generation of what's going to happen. You're now in over 100 countries around the globe. But could you tell us, what was the turning point? Where did it all, what was the spurt of growth? Where did it start to, what was the hockey stick effect? And where did it really start to trend and grow as the organization? Could you just perhaps shed some light on that?
You know, we started as a very simple, small organization. I mean, it started with a relatively small office, then with one machine in the in the late 70s, and then into the 80s. And of course, you know, you must remember that at that time, our country was going through conflict. There was various political and other instability. But I think what my father did that allowed us to develop in the way that we have now is his persistence, his commitment. And if you ask me the story of Dilmah, it is essentially the heart of it is the passion of one man, my father. But then to complement that passion, of course, was a great vision. The vision was not simply of making money, because making money is, I suppose, something that many people can do in different ways, but his vision was much greater than simply commercial success. And so having that vision, it was emboldened, or it was made possible through commitment, through perseverance, because commitment is great, but he met with so many obstacles. Some of them included, for example, the freight rates to Australia at the time being increased artificially simply for his product, because at that time, of course, his own peers, as much as the opposition, their competition, were against him and didn't want him to succeed. And so he found a situation where packed or branded tea into Australia was more expensive to ship than bulk tea, which absolutely makes no sense. But that was part of the or the unfair, unethical practices that were used against him. And I think that if we go back to where the brand really began to grow, I would say it would be in the mid 2000s, so around 2000, 2005. But what's important to remember, particularly bearing in mind the fact that we are talking mostly with a group of your students, is the fact that you cannot say that there was an inflection point at which suddenly there was exponential growth. But no, every single step that we took from, you know, we were never a local brand. We were always an export brand initially, and it's only latterly that we came to Sri Lanka. But from the very first market, whether it was the Maldives with a small LCL, a pallet load of stock, or whether it was Russia with 400 or 500 containers a year, every single step contributed to what the brand is today. And the most important thing along that journey was the commitment to maintaining an uncompromising emphasis on the founding principles. You know, and why I say that is that so often we are challenged, and I know that many of our competitors, or many of our colleagues in the industry, and your students will be challenged to compromise on the founding principles. So when you design a brand around integrity, around quality, and so on, it's easy for someone to come along and say, hey, I'll take 20 containers off you, but you know, I need this. I need you to mix this tea with this, and so on. So compromising the principles of authenticity, purity of origin, and so on. It seems lucrative, but I think that it is our perseverance, my father's absolute uncompromising insistence on maintaining the founding principles, even at commercial loss. In many cases, we lost some what we thought were great opportunities, but what we realized were short-term opportunities. And so I think we came to that inflection point based on this very, very firm foundation of integrity.
Fantastic. You know, you are today a top 10, you're in the top 10 tea brands in the world. I don't know whether you're number 6 or 8. I don't know. It might change year on year, but you are the top 10 tea brand in the world. And what's fascinating about it is it's your name. It's your name as well as your brother's name, you know, and I'd like to ask you, we'd like to hear, as a 19-year-old who joined the organization at a very young age, I'm sure by then there's some export business that had been developed. What was your ambition? How did you transform? What kind of strategies did you embrace from a 19-year-old to grow the organization and be the CEO in the driving seat? What kind of ambitions did you have, and what kind of journey did you go through? Would you mind sharing that, if it's not too personal?
I would love to tell you that I had a grand ambition and a beautiful vision, but I must tell you, coming straight out of university, I didn't. I knew nothing. I came out of the London School of Economics. I spent 10 years in England. I thought I knew everything, but it's only latterly that I realized that in fact, it is through the people call it the school of hard knocks that you really, through getting battered and realizing the practical reality of commerce that you can really use. I'm not saying that formal education is a waste. No, absolutely not. It provides the framework without which no entrepreneur can work. But what what the practical reality that I came across when I came back, what it did was really temper that and give, and I can tell you that today, what that education does is it creates an enabling environment, enabling framework to understand new technologies, to understand the need to build AI, to build precision agriculture, because quite often there are situations where people may be inflexible. And I think the formal education was critical, but it's important to understand that when you start on your journey in life, you need to really refine. It's like what you say, the Japanese, when they make the samurai sword, it goes through an incredible temperature. I don't know the numbers, but it goes through incredible temperature, and the hotter it is, the finer the steel and so on. And so that trial by fire, that refinement is absolutely critical in any environment, simply because with the theoretical knowledge, you have a great asset. Yes, you can go and work in any business. You can probably succeed in any business, but where you can make a difference is by marrying that knowledge with a passion and a commitment for an industry and with a purpose. And I think for me, more than anything, the purpose that my father built into the foundation of our business, saying that business is a matter of human service, that is what makes the difference. I suppose in any instance, it would be fantastically fulfilling to go and work. I mean, when I came out of the LSE at graduation, you get lots of companies that come, the accountancy firms, etc., that come and say, you can give you a job, we can give you this. It sounds very attractive, but actually, and I'm sure those would have been successful, and for your students, those will also be successful. But when you come back to Sri Lanka, and when your vision, your knowledge is galvanized with a purpose that is national, that is social, it is far more fulfilling than any commercial success. And that's maybe would you like me to go into some of that now, Lewie? Or
Sure.
Maybe I'll explain something about the business so that you could sort of understand. The business is formed on three pillars. Taste, of course, because my father's core objective is to share the pleasure in fine tea. So purity of origin, taste. When you talk about taste in tea, it's not simply tea that is with milk or sugar or not, but it is the terroirs, the different teas from different microclimates, seasonal teas, etc., to really present an experience rather than simply a cup of tea. And that combines innovation and so on. But then the goodness, for us, it's an incredible pleasure to be working with a product that we know has this antioxidant goodness. It is something that we know is good for our consumer. And today I know there's so many fantastic products, some not so fantastic, which are really good, but still might harm the environment. In tea, of course, the monoculture is not a great thing, but it's something that we can do something about. And so the goodness in the antioxidants is something that really inspires us. But ultimately, what goes beyond the conventional definition of success, which is commercial, is the purpose of our business, because it takes the business from what we would define as conventional success to a level of significance that is really far more fulfilling. And I can tell you, a couple of days ago, somebody came and told me that we have 3 or 4 judges amongst the children of tea pickers who have been through our scholarship program. Now, that kind of fulfillment is it's impossible to achieve commercially. And if you look at, I don't know if you have seen some of the work of our foundation, maybe I'll show you a little bit. I mean, this kind of stuff, maybe I'll go to that and just talk to you a little bit about that. I mean, these are areas that you know of, but our brand essentially is part of an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is based on these principles. So the taste, the goodness, and the purpose are critical. But then if you look at the challenges that our world is facing today, if we as businesses are not part of the solution, then we are subscribing to a conventional, dated, and really quite a parasitic concept of business. You know, there are various movies. I don't know, I think you guys are too young to know Casablanca and all of these movies, but most of them talk about business people as something quite evil. Maybe something more recent, Wall Street. You can see how awful those people are because of their single-minded focus on money. But ultimately, if you really look at the role of business, particularly post-COVID, today we have seen every single pre-existing social and economic condition that we have in our world, inequality, gender issues, if you look at race issues, so many issues that are inflamed by the current situation. They are underlined post-COVID and particularly climate change. And so if you take all of those and really consider at a moral level that it is an obligation not only of an individual or a business to begin to address that, a business has incredible ability to do it, because simply if you look at climate change, since 2005, since the Stern report, since the British government's Stern report, the solutions were obvious. They were there. But the question is how we share them, how we engage with people. Now we do that. We started a concept called climate reality. We started we were part of three initiating partners, the Chamber of Commerce, IUCN, and us, which started Biodiversity Sri Lanka, talking to other businesses and say, hey, look, we've got these issues. We've got inequality. We've got biodiversity loss. We've got climate change, but there are solutions and we need to do something. And by being a part of the solution, I can tell you it has enriched our business. It's not only this. I mean, if you look at working with UNGC, the National Center for Children with Cerebral Palsy, incredibly fulfilling. Children, youth with cerebral palsy, with Down syndrome, with other developmental disorders, we're able to take them from a restrictive, almost an imprisoned environment and bring them and actually look beyond their disability and focus on their ability. Now, this is something that a business can. Why? Because we can access resources. We can make calls to doctors overseas and say, hey, come and guide us. Tell us what we should do. So a business has a certain responsibility. And I think by acknowledging that responsibility, harnessing it, we can not only do good ourselves, but we can also build on this other pillar of ours, which is to be an advocate, to bring in government. So at Biodiversity Sri Lanka, we're very honored that we have government representatives, we have private sector, because today the scale of the problems are such that whether a government, a business, or an individual alone, there's no way that we can fix it. But through collaboration, there's a lot we can do. Otherwise, you know, we might end up, people say, oh, they're a lovely business, they did so many good things. That's a random act of good, whether it is environmental or social. Yeah, it's nice, but it's not going to change much. So,
if I may just ask you, could you just give us a feeling of the scale of your operation? I understand you produce 2,000 bags per minute. Could you just tell us a little bit of, we know that you're in 100+ markets. Is there anything that we don't know that you could tell us for us to understand the scale of this operation that goes from your tea factory to tea plucking? I mean, you've taken control of the entire vertical, from bagging to buying to exporting to even sort of diversifying into some related industries like the packaging industry. So could you just give us the scale of your business at the moment?
Louis, not 2,000. We have machines that produce 2,000 bags a minute, but I think on an average day, to be honest, I haven't calculated it recently, we probably produce around 5 to 6 million tea bags or cups of tea. And they currently go around, I mean, they go to over 100 countries around the world. But I think what I would like to emphasize there is, yes, the number is important, but our focus is much more on the positioning, on the practical aspects of taking the product to market. And maybe I'll explain a few things. You know, if you look typically at the Sri Lankan tea plantation sector, the sector is characterized by gender issues, social issues, etc. But ultimately, this concept of a living wage, it's a critical concept, and Sri Lanka does pay the highest wages for the plantation sector relative, of course, to other major producers. But the concept of a living wage necessarily involves the buyer, the marketing factors, because if you have a tea industry in Sri Lanka that is catering purely to private label or catering to bulk tea, there's no way we are going to be able to build the margins that will allow us to deliver a living wage, not only in tea plantations, but in packaging, etc., etc. And so I think for this, marketing is a critical enabler. And so for your students, what I would like to say is, it's very important that your marketing message and your marketing proposition is tailored to your resource. So in our case, we have a high cost, but necessarily a high quality. You know, Ceylon tea has a unique name. So if you look in comparison with teas from much cheaper origins, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on, we cannot compete on price. We can never compete on price. And so if you look at our national export average, sadly, it's too close to our national cost of production. I mean, I don't think there's even 200 rupee difference between the cost of production and the national export average. Now that's a crime. In our case, our export average is something like, I think 2,400, 2,500 rupees a kilo, whereas sadly, most of the industry is hovering around 600, 700, 800 rupees. So ultimately, I think that we need to focus on a strong differentiation, because our asset is our Sri Lankan tea plantations. We can never disconnect the marketing of Ceylon tea with the interest of the tea plantations. And so what I would like to add there is that we have to bear in mind that we have a very traditional method. So many people will look at it, look at Kenya, look at the machine that harvests 6,000 kilos a day, which is a self-calibrating robotic picker, and would say, wow, that's the way to go. Yeah, it is the way to go. But the important thing is that today we have a particular set of circumstances in Sri Lanka where we can't do that overnight. And so we need to gear our marketing message, we need to gear our brands, we need to gear our message to the world with the artisanship, with the variation, the microclimates, the muscular teas, with the regional teas, the Ratnapura. They're all fundamentally different. Now, most of us know that, you know, if you want thickness, intensity, you want chocolatey notes, you're going down to Gaul, you're going down to Ratnapura, but then you go to Nuwara, you know, it's sometimes honey-like. So there is this spectrum of taste that we could focus on. So this is what I mean by aligning our product and aligning our marketing message and proposition with our resource. And really that's what we do, because every day you have a hand-picked leaf, and ultimately every cup of tea has 30, 35 hand-picked leaves and buds. So that's something that's pretty incredible. So my request or my suggestion to your students is, yes, the whole industry is trying to compete on a global scale. Okay, that's okay if you're producing wooden boxes or something that doesn't have a national dimension, national social dimension in Sri Lanka. But tea has a national social dimension. It has 3 million people who are directly or indirectly dependent on it. And so in order to be able to align ourselves with national social economic priorities, it is absolutely critical that we build on differentiation. Of course, that's a core marketing message, which I'm sure you're constantly telling them about.
Absolutely. And it's amazing to see, you know, the entire ecosystem that I see on the screen at the moment in terms of the different initiatives and the brands. But could you also tell us, I'm sure your dad or yourself would have faced lots of challenges. We've seen in the last 2 years, certain issues with the exports to Russia. We've seen it in the news that the Ceylon tea has had some level of impact. We've seen the tensions in the Middle East, the US sanctions. We've also seen some challenges in the European region, where you're also strong in some markets. What kind of challenges do you envisage, or did you have along the way, and perhaps how you managed to overcome some of them big challenges?
Louis, I would say that there's a simple principle. You have to market to the generation that you live in. I'm sure I'm stating the obvious for you, but the point is that we continue to work around traditional markets, Libya, Iraq, Iran, etc., and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. But there is a vulnerability in focusing on those traditional markets. It's I feel ashamed to even tell you that, because I mean that's stating the obvious. But unfortunately, many in our tea industry don't actually realize that. And this is where we have tried to be different, because when you go into Italy, as an example, it's a completely different set of requirements. You need to be very innovative. You need to be very different. You need to adapt. I mean, that's a basic part of marketing. But the point is that in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon tea, in the product that we produce and the multitude of different terroirs that we offer, you have every single thing that you need to cater to a North American, Canadian, Latin American, English, etc. And this is the thing. I would say that if I talk about a challenge, the biggest challenge we have is the mindset. So we need to understand that in the 21st century, it is no longer about price. I mean, of course it is about price, but the price market is the mass market, which is price driven, and the discount culture in retail is completely beyond the realm of possibility for us. So we need to look beyond. And when you say look beyond, it is about looking at specialities. It is about looking at value addition in a sincere form. It is about real iced tea. If you look around the world, what is iced tea? It is the most highly sugared, highly flavored, and this is, I'm not talking about Sri Lankan companies doing this, but at a global level, we have abdicated the ownership of iced tea to this highly sugared, highly flavored, and really bad product. But what is Sri Lankan iced tea? I mean, we have the possibility now. We have established a factory. We are reimagining. I'm not saying that we are perfect, but what I'm saying is that we need a different mindset to understand the consumer and to break away from the past in order to see that, for example, in North America, it might be tea gastronomy. I think I have a couple of slides that, yeah, I mean, this is, it's a concept that we have. It's called tea inspiration for the 21st century. Now we go around the world, we go around the world talking to chefs, talking to mixologists, talking to them about tea, about how tea works with different types of food, how tea infused, and looking at new methods of cooking using teas and so on. So if, and this didn't come out of any extensive research, and I want to add that, a lot of people think that we are this big brand that has access to unlimited resources. We are not. And the research for this simply came about by looking online at a free, very free resource of searching and trying to see what are the top television programs in each market. And what I found, I mean, going back to the 1990s, was that it was food. In every instance, I mean, okay, at that time it was the top 1 or 2. Today it's the top 5 out of 5 is something to do with food. And so we built our tea gastronomy program, which is Real High Tea, Chef and the Tea Maker, Tea in 5 Senses, all of these, and the School of Tea around that proposition. And that has helped us not only to, with a competition like this, it's great to engage with consumers and with professionals, with the trade. But what is equally important is about learning from them and being able to feed your innovation. And so that's really what happened. We learned about new flavors, new ingredients. We learned about new culinary methods. And of course, we built our connections. So I think innovation. So the biggest challenge we have today is a fear of innovation, but also a fear of marketing. And why I say that is that marketing is really expensive. But marketing is, as you know, it's a fantastically dynamic area where today it's, yeah, it's expensive, but if you do the right thing, the returns are there. So it's, you know, I think people still talk about big TV program, TV campaigns and so on. But in our case, when I say that we are not this typical big company, is that, look, sometimes it starts with a LinkedIn group. I mean, in some countries, it's we start with Facebook because we simply can't afford the kind of marketing that people say. And Facebook means we have a guy in our office who's populating it. You know, we have a translator who's helping. It's a very simple operation. I'm saying this because I meet so many people who say, look, it's easy for you. It's not easy for us. It's not easy for anyone because we have the commitment. And what we have done is also possible for every one of your students. And I really want to encourage them, if you get your alignment and if you ground yourself in reality, whether your market is Colombo or if it is one street in Colombo, I can tell you in some cases, you know, when we launched our tea lounge, going back 2013, we started by producing little cards which said something silly, like it had two lips on it and it said, "I think you're hot." And we put those cards on the desks of people working in the WTC, in the Twin Towers, in the towers here. And when you open it, it says something like, "Chill out at the tea lounge and come out here, and here's a voucher." Now, I got a friend of mine to get his peon to go and deliver these. And that's how we started the concept at that time, simply because we couldn't afford to invest in the kind of campaigns that maybe we can afford now. But we still do that. If you look at some territories, I can tell you the UK. In the UK, you have a very discount-driven retail sector. So we exited that sector, and 7 years later, we are going back in. But we're going back in office by office. So sometimes when I have the opportunity of being around, I go into an office and I do a tasting demonstration. We taste, we put a little bit of alcohol, we come up with different dishes, different drinks, and we try to understand the customer. We try to build signature experiences for them and engage. It's really as simple as that. So whether it is at a group level of a large, I don't know, auto grill or large group, or whether it is at a smaller level, what is most important is that commitment, that knowledge, and that passion. Because once the customer sees that, you know, I still go into cafes and do a marketing thing. I mean, I had to do it by Zoom today, earlier on today, where we were talking about different ingredients, where we were looking at how, you know, because there is a big localization trend, so we have to substitute some of our ingredients in certain territories. And so we work with this. We work now, if a cafe demands it, we don't focus on their quantities, we focus on getting it done.
Right. Just a question, because we have some students who are doing the case study on global marketing decisions. In terms of China and the whole Belt and Road, how do you see the opportunity around the Belt and Road initiative? Do you see China as an opportunity, or is China a threat?
I think China is a phenomenal opportunity. And even where tea is concerned, there is a uniqueness around Sri Lankan tea based on its purity and its cleanliness and so on. And so where China is concerned, the only thing is that there is a huge cultural, can't say a barrier, but there is a very significant level of adaptation that is required. So in China, the level of technological sophistication is phenomenal. So my advice to anyone who's involved in China or aspires to be involved in China is go to Shanghai. Spend some time there and watch how differently consumers engage with brands. It is fundamentally different and it is instant. As an example, last year when I was there we had a school of tea. We talked, I mean, it was a little bit ironic that here are a few Sri Lankans going across to China to talk to them about tea, which actually originated in China a while ago. But the fact is that at that point, you know, we were trying to work out. I placed a trial order for live fish, a garupa, which from the moment we clicked, it was WhatsApp. Not WhatsApp. They've got, they've got their version of WhatsApp. Sorry, it escapes me right now. And what happened from the moment I placed that order with our distributor was that within 30 minutes, a live fish was delivered in a beautifully packed, of course, very plastic container. And that is a principle. So it's about convenience. And so based on that experience, we adapted a lot of our strategy. We focused a lot more on convenience stores, on the smaller, now the local store concept, and moved a little bit away from the hypermarkets, which actually coincidentally globally are having a little bit of a tough time. So I would say China is a fantastic opportunity, but of course you can't generalize because there are some products that offer opportunity in China. And I think health and wellness, that whole sector around food, is a great opportunity, but we've got to get the product right.
All right. I've got a bit of a broader question, a bit of a macro question for you concerning, because you are not only Sri Lanka's largest player, you're also one of the biggest players in the world. Can the green gold of Sri Lanka save our economy? Do you have any hope? Could we build a strategy? Could we build a strategy much like perhaps South Korea has been built around Samsung, Hyundai, Kia, and LG? Could we have a cohesive strategy that perhaps a few brands like yours that aspire to maybe one day be the #1 tea brand in the world? Is that on your mind? And what role could you play in fulfilling that, in making many more brands, join the bandwagon of being global brands, even outside the tea industry?
I'm an eternal optimist, and the short answer is yes, it is possible. It's possible because we have some brilliant teas, and we have an enduring connection with our tea industry. But it requires certain things, certain changes, and most importantly, it requires the alignment of academia, that is innovation, so research, with business, with government, and the regulatory authorities. At the moment, unfortunately, each is on its own trajectory. And when that happens, you don't have the possibility to innovate the way you should. So, for example, we need a national quality infrastructure desperately to be able to tell us if there is something bad in our teas, to be able to address malpractices in the tea industry. There's so much that needs to be done. But most of the samples have to be assessed overseas. So that's not a good thing. We need to build a national quality infrastructure. We need to build a research infrastructure. We need to extend that through to the businesses and government to work in partnership. And as for your question, whether there is a possibility for the tea industry to save the country, I wouldn't go so far as to say save the country, but I think to substantially increase its contribution to the national economy, yes. And simple fact is, as I mentioned earlier, you have a cost of production of, say, just under 500 rupees a kilo. You have a national export FOB average of, say, 700-800 rupees. You have a couple of brands. I think there's Dilmah at 2,800. There's Basilur around 2004, 2005. Either way, there's a couple of brands over 2,000. I mean, I'm talking about the brands that are exporting in some volume. There you clearly see the opportunity of realigning everyone to say, look, we will sing off one hymn sheet. We will talk about quality, 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 sustainability, purity, etc. The problem is that when you can walk into a supermarket in Poland, you will see Dilmah Premium Ceylon 100s priced at 16 zloty. And you will see, unfortunately, our competitors who have priced their Ceylon tea at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 zloty. So in this environment, you can clearly see that there is a misalignment in our industry. Now, if we were all to say, look, we are not cheap, we are the best in the world, and therefore we are going to charge that best in the world price, yes, then you have the possibility to really make a much more significant contribution to the national economy.
All right. In terms of substitution, I'm a big tea drinker, but I also like my coffee. What kind of substitutes do you think might disrupt the growth of the tea industry? We have lots of other factors geopolitically that are impacting the tea industry. But from a consumer's standpoint, from a behavior standpoint, can there be any other substitutes like the trend of coffee or anything else, perhaps? And what is Dilmah doing to perhaps reinvent yourself to be a part of that culture, to be a part of that lifestyle? Are you embracing it wholeheartedly, and are you looking through avenues to be a part of that consumer behavior? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure. What the consumer likes most is what's best for the consumer. If the consumer says they like coffee, that's fine. I don't see coffee as a substitute for tea or tea as a substitute for coffee, but rather I think that there are different occasions in the day when consumers like a coffee. If somebody likes to wake up in the morning and have a ristretto or an espresso, you're not going to substitute tea, however strong or intense you make it. So I think that would be a tough ask to substitute coffee. But instead, what you see, looking at global Euromonitor data, is that you have tea growing in coffee-dominant countries. So, I mean, we are supplying into Brazil, into Mexico, etc. Places where a couple of years ago, tea was something you take when you're sick. And I can tell you, one of those places 10 years ago was Czech Republic, where, 15 years ago, where our partners said, when we have a bad stomach or when we are not feeling well, we take a cup of tea. So today, we are doing almost $1 million FOB value into that territory. But it's not by following convention. It's by looking at differentiated methods. It's about educating. So we have schools of tea that travel around the world. Of course, not since COVID, but we go into places. We talk. We present the allure of tea in a very contemporary way. It's not just about cooking with tea. It's about understanding. Most people don't even know how to make a proper cup of tea. You've probably seen some of the online the videos about making tea. I mean, they're laughable, some of them. The basic principle of understanding the quality of water, etc., etc. So we set up the School of Tea for that purpose. And what the School of Tea does is it looks at innovation, it looks at research and development, it looks at it looks at crafting unique experiences for customers, for professionals, for schools. We affiliate with World Chefs schools, culinary schools, and so on. So what we are doing is trying to change that mindset, trying to work around innovation to be able to deliver. I think the thing is that if we accept and try to compete within an existing framework that is ultimately it's 150 years old, we're not going to have a great deal of success. So I think that's more or less it. So what we try to do is we try to inspire with knowledge. And as for substitution, the consumer doesn't really, I don't think the consumer sees it as, okay, am I going to have tea or this? No, the consumer goes up to the shelf and says, hey, Dilmah has come up with fabulous turmeric and pepper-based drink. I'm going to try it. I don't think they see in the same compartments that we do. And therefore, I believe that ultimately every beverage is substitutable for the other. It's just a question of how engaging, how attractive, how relevant, and I think relevance is key. We make it, and today there is no beverage, there's no herb that is more relevant to a 21st century lifestyle than tea. Look at it's unique in its level of antioxidants. It protects from Alzheimer's, all forms of dementia. It protects from cardiovascular, stroke, cancers. What more can you ask? And this is all demonstrated, scientifically evident. If you go onto PubMed, you're going to see that. So yeah, as for tea becoming irrelevant, absolutely not. the biggest threat that we have is ourselves in not believing and not having the mindset to accept that tea is an incredible herb. We simply need to change our mindset and reimagine and say, look, what does a 21st century consumer want? We should forget about coffee, forget about competing with alcopops, malt beverages, etc. We need to focus on what is really great about tea, and everything that we think as being a disadvantage, we need to reinterpret that, because our high cost, it's a reality. Yes, we can't have, yes, it's, people are going to, they lament, look, 80% of our product cost, our cost of production is labor. Yes, it is. So nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. But what you can do about it is try to market your way out of it. And that's by saying this is artisanal, it's handpicked, and making sure that translates into benefit for the workers concerned. And so then we tell the story. And by telling the story, you build trust in the brand and trust in the product. And there you have, I believe, in my opinion, a solution.
Dilhan, what's your vision for the company? I mean, you're now in the driving seat of the company. You're leading a large team. You have now arrived globally. Everyone identifies your brand. And what next? What's in store for Dilmah?
I think what in a family business, first of all, you're never really in the driving seat. It's several people share the driving seat with you, and that's great, because that's what family business is about. And we have 3 generations that are part of this business. I would say that in terms of what's next, it's really about reinterpreting the same principles that my father set down in the 1950s and in 1988 when the brand was first launched, reinterpreting it for this current century. If you look at tea gastronomy, many people will say, look, that's heretical. But ultimately, at the center of that concept, whether you use tea as a base in producing chocolate ganache or use it as a marinade in scallops, ultimately, it's about respect for tea. And that is where, so the same principle that my father espoused going back in time is what we do today, except in a different way. So today, tea gastronomy is about sharing the pleasure that he wanted to do, except doing it with chefs, but teaching them about texture, building the principles of taste, of texture, of components in tea, breaking it down, building the principles of pairing, building the principles of using tea as an ingredient, but actually going to it in quite in a professional way, where this information-hungry generation will accept it as being sincere and trustworthy. And so I suppose short answer is it's more of the same, but the long answer is that it is reinterpreting what was laid down in 1988 as 1988 as the heart of the brand, reinterpreting it from the lens or perspective of Gen Z, the millennials, and so on.
We have a lot of entrepreneurs and budding entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs studying with us. And a vibrant SME sector and entrepreneurship is obviously a solution to an economy, a small economy like ours. Would you have maybe 3 steps, a few points of advice that you'd like to give someone who's perhaps just started a website, has a big idea, likes to go global, maybe a commodity, maybe export something else, perhaps even a service? What would be your recipe and points to watch out in terms of scaling up and doing well?
I think for most people who ask me this question, there was a webinar last week also where it's an unexpected answer. And I think the answer is humility. And I'm telling you that for 2 reasons. First of all, humility means that I can tell you that even today, the greatest research that we do on our product is by standing at a supermarket shelf. I do that every time I travel anywhere. People tell me, oh, you travel, you're jetting around the world. It's not jetting around the world. It's standing at the supermarket, talking to consumers, hearing feedback, hearing people say, look, I hate this about this product. I don't like the color. We have buyers who've said, look, we don't like the brown on your Italian almond and we didn't list it therefore. That's relevant feedback. Of course, the buyer is important, but the consumer is just as important. And so standing and watching the way the consumer shops, we can't afford this shopper marketing AI and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I know there's some amazing tools, and if you can, fantastic. But for us, I think there is no substitute to watching and learning, exchanging communication with consumers, seeing consumer complaints, consumer compliments coming in and responding to them. And those are tools that my father always used. Humility is important because you should never say, look, I know it all, because you never do. It's always the consumer. And I would never say that I know it all, because the consumer teaches us something every single day and many times each day. But humility is also important, because you need to understand that what defines success is not eventually, and if you have the right combination of vision, of passion, of commitment, perseverance, and so on, you will succeed. But what defines that success is not the trappings of success, you know, the nice car, the nice home, the nice clothes, and so on. But actually, it is the purpose. And I can tell you today that there's all this kind of fancy terminology about purpose-driven business and so on. But the fact is that it is the purpose that ultimately drives your business. So with a combination of humility to understand what is your category, where is your passion, what does a consumer expect? Because we can go out and say, look, we have the most incredibly magnificent tea from this estate in Nuwara. It's going to cost you $7. Consumer sometimes doesn't know how to pronounce. So if we offer a tea from Nuwara in certain countries, it could either be mistaken for something else, or it lacks recognition, lacks awareness, or they simply cannot pronounce it. And so what's the point? So there we need to change names. So we have Valley of Kings, we have different. So understanding the consumer is critical. It is not only about spending time on research. Of course, you do your web research, that's for free, and that there's some great resources, but observe, talk to consumers whenever you can, ask them and say, look, would you like to try this? And that's something that we do. Sometimes, you know, I mean, in New Zealand a few months ago, just pre-COVID, we set up stands, we were tasting and saying, taste this, you know, what do you think? And then the consumer feeds back. And sometimes it's the most unexpected and bizarre comment, which is relevant. So my suggestion is humility, to be able to absorb, to learn, and to never allow purpose to be overcome by any sort of the arrogance that usually comes with success. It is something that we must all fight. But I would say that that's the key element. But then, of course, come the values, the vision, the commitment, and so on. But always be uncompromising. Once you have put your plan together, whether you decide to position your product at a premium, a mid, or a low level, you need to understand and make sure that all the different elements, from the research, development, the constant change, the evolution, and the product cost itself, the supply chain, all of these different elements, the packaging, etc., that once you understand that they're all aligned, then you need to persevere and say, okay, I am this. For example, I can tell you many years ago, while we maintained our premium positioning, there was a buyer, a regional buyer from Walmart, that came and said, hey, you know, I'm going to buy this, this, and this, and I want this. They placed a trial order and they didn't give us control over the retail pricing. And my father said, stop it immediately. You know, we were like, what are you talking about? And he said, no, you have to stop supplying this customer. We said they're the largest retailer in the world, I mean, at the time. But he said no. And that was simply because they didn't allow us to position our product where it should be. And actually, that was an extremely wise decision, because had they continued with what they were doing, they would by now account for 40 to 50% of our total volume. And when they click their fingers, we would be dancing. So today, we wouldn't be a Ceylon tea brand. We would be importing cheap tea, and we would be mixing it and shipping it, and we would have lost the heart of Dilmah. So there is absolutely a critical requirement to be uncompromising once you have developed your plan.
So, Dilhan, in the last 4 minutes, have I missed anything in the nice story, in this beautiful story of Dilmah, the Dilmah story? Have I missed anything that you'd like to share with everyone in this journey? Is there anything else that you would like to?
I think, simply bearing in mind that I have this extraordinary privilege of talking to some budding entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka. What I would like to advise you is we face a situation where we have greater volatility, policy inconsistency, chaos in the markets. Every day the exchange rates are changing because Trump has tweeted or something, there's something that happens somewhere, fires in Australia, whatever. So in this environment, building a sustainable brand is your best insurance against this kind of volatility. But the important part there is, with apologies to Lewie if this offends you, throw away the marketing books. I mean, you read books about amazing opportunities, and they're all focusing on what this company, about what Apple did, and so on. Forget about that. The practical business of marketing starts with the guy who's sitting next to you, tasting, sampling, this one supermarket that you go to, the kade that you might be frequenting. It starts there. Take the first step, because every journey, as you know, every journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. But that's important because we often miss the point. We go for the big things, but we always forget that, yes, get one cafe, get the second and the third, and then somebody's going to see you. You're going to get a hotel. You need to understand the importance of practical and incremental growth, because if you get a chain of 100 cafes and you've made a mistake, you're in deep trouble. You could have legal issues. You could have so many. You start with one and you learn, you refine your product and your process and your marketing communication, and you go to the second and the third and you grow. That's really what we did. I mean, when I joined the business, we were shipping half pallets in some cases, but gradually the business built. My brother and I, we aligned with my father's philosophy, and the business grew and grew and grew. And of course, it's become an incredible, it's been an incredible journey for us. I'm not saying that we are the biggest brand in the world. We are not. We are far from it. But we will continue to grow by keeping that mindset of humility, of constantly learning, and also of persistence.
Thank you so much, guys. I think we had a wonderful session. Probably the second billionaire that I've had talking to us, not only in terms of the brand, but as a person, truly inspiring and also truly humble. Thank you very much for making the time. I understand you're still at office, Dilhan, and it's a Friday.
That's the other thing. It's a regular thing. So don't expect, if you're starting your own brand, don't expect to leave office before 9 o'clock. And that's a reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am also at office at the moment.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dilhan. It has been truly a blessing. And thank you so much for everything. On behalf of all our students, thank you very, very much. And we wish Dilmah to be the #1 brand in the world very, very soon under your leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lewie. Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Cheers.